It was near midnight when I saw her. The rain wasn't falling. It was flying sideways, like the wind was trying to strip the land bare. My lantern guttered with every gust, the flame fighting to stay alive. I was headed toward the barn to check the latch when a flicker of motion caught the edge of the light. Just a shape at first, maybe a stray mule, maybe nothing at all. But then it stumbled, and that's when I saw her. She came staggering out of the storm like a ghost soaked to the bone, barefoot, belly full, one hand pressed to her ribs like she was holding something broken inside her. The other cradled her stomach, gentle, protective. She didn't see me, didn't call out. She just moved toward the barn, slow and strange, like she didn't quite believe it was real. Her knees gave way a few steps from the door. She fell into the mud without a sound. Didn't twitch, didn't cry. Just lay there like the earth had claimed her. I stood still, not because I was afraid. I haven't been afraid in years. Because that's what happens when you live alone too long. Every sound feels like an intrusion. My name's Caleb Morrow. I haven't had a soul cross this land in months, not since winter rolled in and the roads went soft. It's been 2 years since Mary died, since the baby went with her, since this house went quiet and stayed that way. So when I saw her there in the mud, a stranger with no name and a belly full of questions, I should have turned back. But I didn't. There was something in the way she folded, not just tired, but emptied, like someone who'd used up everything but the will to keep going. I stepped out into the rain, walked slow, boots sinking into the ground. When I knelt beside her, I reached for her shoulder, just to check if she was breathing. She flinched, hard, like I'd struck her. Didn't open her eyes, just curled tighter, quiet as breath. Her face was bruised, cut across one cheekbone. She looked no older than 20, maybe less. I didn't ask who she was. Didn't ask what she was running from. I just lifted her, carried her into the barn and laid her down in the loft where the hay was warm and dry. Wrapped her in the old quilt Mary stitched the year before she passed. Lit the lantern. Set water beside her. Turned to leave. And just as I reached the ladder, I heard her whisper, voice cracked and weak as wind. Etta. I didn't say a word, just nodded once, and told myself it was only for the night. I didn't sleep much that night. The wind rattled the eaves like old bones, and the rain drummed steady on the tin roof. But it wasn't the storm that kept me up. It was the silence after the kind that settles in your bones and makes everything feel too still. I sat by the stove with a cup of coffee gone cold, boots muddy, coat still damp, and listened for the sound of her breathing through the boards above me. She didn't stir. I didn't go check. By morning, the storm had passed, but the world looked washed out, pale sky, soaked earth, fences sagging under the weight of water. I made a pot of oats, sprinkled cinnamon on top, and left a bowl by the ladder to the loft. Didn't say anything. Didn't wait around. 10 minutes later, a soft "thank you" drifted down. Shaky, barely there. But it reached me. I stood there for a long moment, staring out the barn door at the soaked yard, hand resting on the post, like I'd forgotten how to move. It had been 5 winters since Mary died. 5 winters since I held her hand and felt it go still. 5 winters since the fever took both her and the child before the cradle ever rocked. I buried them beneath the cottonwoods up on the rise where the light touches first in spring. Built a white fence, planted lilacs, never let the weeds take hold. But inside the house, everything froze. The cradle stayed in the corner of the parlor untouched. The tiny clothes she'd sewn by lamplight stayed folded neat in the drawer. Mary's shawl still hung by the door, faded and soft from age. I didn't move a thing, didn't speak much either. Grief does that to a man. Out here, folks understand. They nod, tip their hats, and give you space. No one asks questions when the church pew beside you stays empty. I spent my days fixing fence lines, tending goats, mending things that didn't need mending. Rufus, my old hound, passed a year after Mary. I didn't replace him. I didn't replace anything. Just kept going, breathing, existing, until last night. Now there was a stranger in my barn, a girl with no last name and bruises on her face. A girl who didn't ask for anything but thanked me all the same. It wasn't much, but it was more than I'd heard in a long while. By the third morning, she was still there. I didn't ask why. Didn't press. When I brought her another bowl of oats, she took it gently, like it was something precious. Her eyes met mine for the first time pale gray, sharp beneath the tired. Eyes that had seen more than a girl her age should have. She couldn't have been more than 20. Thank you, she said again, a little clearer now. I gave a small nod. Food's already made. She smiled, but only for a second. And I saw it, a yellowing bruise beneath the cuff of her sleeve. The kind a man leaves behind. She stayed. That was the first surprise. Second was how she moved, like she didn't want to be noticed, how she slipped from the barn in the early light and sat in the garden patch, knees in the dirt, hands brushing the soil like it might remember her name. I watched from the porch, not saying a word. She wasn't planting. She was weeding, slow, careful, humming something I didn't recognize, the kind of tune folks carry from childhood, worn and threadbare, but still theirs. That sound, it stirred dust in a room I thought I'd sealed shut. Later, when I walked over with coffee and bread, she wiped her hands on her skirt and stood. Hope you don't mind, she said. Just needed to move. Not at all, I answered. That bed's been waiting 5 years for someone to care again. She smiled, the first real one. It didn't last long. Her eyes darted past me, scanning, always scanning, like she was waiting for something to catch up. That evening, I brought out 2 bowls instead of 1. We sat on the porch, eating in silence while the sun sank low and the sky turned orange. She held the bowl with both hands, slow and careful. You have family? I asked, not looking at her. She didn't answer right away. Not anymore, she said finally. I nodded. Didn't press. Pain respects pain. Each day after that, she did a little more. She swept the porch, dusted the windowsills, cleaned out the chicken coop, even though I told her not to. Always quiet, always early, like she was trying to repay something she hadn't named. I caught her standing in front of the cradle once, not touching it, just standing there, like it was sacred, like it was something that might speak if she was still enough. You lose someone too? She asked, voice barely above a breath. I didn't answer, just walked past her and back outside. Some silences don't break easy. That night I stayed up longer than usual. The wind had died and the stars were out, but the house felt different. Not noisy, just alive in a way it hadn't been in years. There was a warmth in the air that didn't come from the fire, a sense of breath in the stillness. And then the barn lantern flickered once, just once, then went still. I told myself again, just one more night, maybe 2, but I already knew. This wasn't something passing through. This was something that would leave a mark. The days grew warmer, but the air around her didn't. Etta moved like a shadow present, useful but never still. Her hands always busy, her voice soft but guarded. She thanked me for meals, never asked for more, said good morning, never said good night. She jumped at sounds that didn't warrant it, the creak of a step, the wind shifting a shutter, my boots on the porch. One evening, just after supper, I stepped into the barn without calling out. She spun so fast she nearly tripped on her skirt, one hand shooting to her belly. "It's just me," I said, holding my hands up. She smiled, or tried to, but her eyes didn't soften. They never did when she was startled. I backed out, slower than I'd come in, gave her space, told myself again not to ask. But questions started collecting in the corners of my mind, same as dust in a room that used to matter. That night I sat by the window a little longer than usual. From where I sat, I could see the glow of the lantern up in the loft. It flickered, then steadied. Then I saw her silhouette. She was pacing, back and forth, back and forth. Hands on her lower back, then at her sides, then covering her belly like it needed protection from something that wasn't there. It was the pacing that got me. Not frantic, not aimless, like a caged thing waiting for the lock to click. The next morning, she acted like nothing happened. Offered to milk the goats, brushed her hair behind her ears, and asked if I'd like her to sweep the smokehouse. I said yes because it was easier than asking why she hadn't slept. Later that day, I offered her the spare room in the house. "The bed's clean," I said. "Sheets fresh." She shook her head. "No need. The barn feels safer." That word stuck with me longer than it should have. Safer than what? A few days later, I found her behind the smokehouse. I wasn't looking for her. I was fetching the pruning shears. But I heard something not crying exactly, more like someone trying not to. She sat on an old stump, head bowed, shoulders shaking so lightly you might miss it if you weren't staring. I almost called out, almost stepped closer. But then I saw her pull something from her skirt pocket. A locket, worn silver, chain nearly snapped. She opened it, looked inside for just a second, then kissed it, gently, like it hurt. Then she snapped it shut and stuffed it deep into her apron pocket like it burned her fingers. I stepped back without a sound. Gave her privacy I wasn't sure she wanted. Later, over supper, she smiled like nothing had happened. Asked if I'd like her to chop kindling in the morning. I nodded. Said, sure, but I couldn't stop thinking about that locket and what or who might be inside it. The letter came on a Tuesday. No return address. Just a worn envelope, watermarked and bent, tucked between the seed catalogs and a feed invoice at the bottom of the mail sack. The kind of letter that looks like it's been riding around too long, waiting to land. I nearly tossed it in the stove. But something about the paper, the way her name was written on the front in small curling script, made me pause. She wasn't in the house. She wasn't ever in the house. I found her behind the barn, raking hay out of the goat pen. Didn't say a word, just held out the envelope. The moment she saw it, her whole face changed. Eyes wide, breath caught, hands suddenly still. She didn't take it at first, just stared at it like it might bite. Then, without a word, she reached out and slipped it into her apron. Said nothing more. Later, I spotted her behind the chicken shed, turned away from the wind, envelope now torn open in her hands. She was reading slow, lips moving, brow tight, like she was counting the weight of every word. I didn't mean to watch, but I didn't look away either. When she finished, she folded the letter once, twice, 3 times neat, tight, precise, and slid it back into the envelope. I waited. She looked over, surprised to see me. Something wrong? I asked. She hesitated. No, just old news. Her voice was brittle, too calm. Then she changed the subject. Asked if the fence needed mending. The goats had their salt. If I'd seen the hawk circling over the far field that morning. I let her talk. Didn't press. But that night the envelope was gone. Not in the stove. Not in the bin. Not tucked into the edges of her quilt. Just gone. The next day she didn't go near the barn until late afternoon. Didn't hum. Didn't weed the garden. Didn't ask if I needed anything. She stayed inside the chicken shed most of the morning, sitting still, staring through the slats like she was watching something only she could see. And then I found it, a scrap, folded between two firewood logs near the back of the stack. Just the corner of the letter ripped, not burned. The rest had vanished, and the piece that remained had just one word left on it, scribbled in that same thin handwriting. Soon. It was just before dusk when I saw him. A rider, dark coat, lean frame, slow pace easing along the ridge just beyond the cottonwoods, far enough away that the face was a shadow, but close enough to see the shape of him, the posture, the pause, when he turned his head toward the barn. Etta was pulling clothes from the line when she caught sight of him. She froze, didn't blink, didn't breathe. The damp shirt slipped from her hands and landed in the dirt. She didn't notice. I followed her gaze, watched the rider disappear into the trees without turning back. When I looked at her again, her hands were gripping her belly, tight, like she thought it might jump from her if she didn't hold it down. And then she whispered something I almost didn't hear. One word. No. That night, she didn't eat. Didn't come near the porch. I saw the light in the barn flicker on after dark. She locked the loft door from inside. I heard the bolt click into place. The next morning, she looked like someone who hadn't slept. Shadows under her eyes, shoulders stiff beneath her shawl. I brought her coffee. She took it without a word and sat in the dirt by the garden bed. Didn't weed, didn't hum, just stared toward the fence line where the trees began. You expecting someone? I asked, careful. She shook her head too fast. I don't think so, she said, but her voice cracked like a branch under too much snow. Even the goats felt it skittish and restless, bleating without reason. The chickens stopped laying altogether. A crow circled low above the smokehouse, slower than usual, like it didn't trust the air. By afternoon, the wind changed, came from the south, thick and heavy. It brought no storm, only stillness, the kind that settles before something breaks. I found her later behind the shed, kneeling beside the stacked firewood. Hands in her lap, dirt caked under her nails like she'd been digging for something she lost. She didn't hear me approach. Didn't speak when I stepped closer. Just looked up at me finally and said in a voice that didn't sound like hers, "He's close." I didn't ask who. Didn't need to. There was something in the way her shoulders curved inward, like she was trying to make herself small enough to disappear. Something in the way her eyes kept darting not toward the barn, but away from it. And the locket she always wore? She wasn't wearing it anymore. It had vanished sometime during the night. I didn't know what she'd done or who she was running from. But I knew this. Whatever was coming was already close enough to cast a shadow. I left for town that morning. Just needed salt, coffee, a new hinge for the goat gate. Told her I'd be back by dusk. She nodded without looking up, hands buried in the garden soil. I didn't like leaving her. not with the sky hanging low and the animals skittish, but I told myself I was imagining it. Told myself a man can't live on fear. The ride was short, but something tugged at me the whole way back, a tightness in my chest that hadn't let go since I saw that rider. When I crested the hill and saw the barn, I knew. There was a second horse, tied up behind the lean-to, dark coat, saddle worn, rider nowhere in sight. I dismounted slow, keeping to the trees, boots sinking into the soft ground. Voices drifted from inside. One was hers. The other, a man. I moved closer, slow as dusk. "I can't keep running," she said, her voice low, raw. "You already did," the man hissed. "You left me to hang." "I had no choice. You know that." "You made a choice, Etta. You chose him." Silence. Then she spoke again, barely a whisper. "He's kind. He trusts me." A laugh followed, sharp and bitter. "That fool? He won't once he knows what you've done." I stepped forward and pushed the barn door open. The hinges groaned and both heads snapped toward me. She gasped, backed away. The man turned tall, wiry, eyes hard as nails. I didn't know him, but I knew the type. Violence wrapped in skin, swagger born of cruelty. The kind of man who breaks things just to feel their shape. He looked me over like I was a shovel left out in the rain. "So this is him," he said. "The farmer." I nodded. "That's right." He stepped forward, slow. "You've been playing a house with something that don't belong to you." Etta said nothing. He glanced back at her. "Forgot to mention she's already got a husband." My gut sank. Etta's face went white. "X," she said too quickly. He grinned. "Still mine where it counts? Still carrying my blood?" The world tilted. I looked at her. "Is it true?" She opened her mouth, closed it, and nodded. "I didn't lie," she said. You told me your family was gone." "They are," she whispered. "He's not family. He's a mistake." He laughed. "A mistake who bought you dresses, who paid your way out west, who you stole from." She didn't deny it, didn't look up. And I stood there, throat dry, hands curling into fists. "I fed you," I said. "Gave you a place to sleep. I know. I trusted you. I never meant to hurt you." It wasn't the hurt that did it. It was the look in her eyes like she'd expected this from the start, like she'd planned to leave again before I ever had the chance to ask her to stay. He moved toward her then, reached for her arm. She flinched like she'd been burned. I stepped between them. "Not fast, just sure. You'll take your hands off her," I said. He smirked. "You don't scare me. You should be scared of what happens if I go back to that house and come out with my shotgun." We stared each other down. Finally, he spit near my boots. "She'll come crawling back. They always do." Then he turned and walked out. The barn was silent but full of noise. She opened her mouth, but I raised my hand. "Go back to the loft." She hesitated, then obeyed. And I stood there alone, in the place I'd tried so hard to keep hollow. The light from the lantern danced across the cradle in the corner. For the first time, it didn't look like hope. It looked like a grave I'd dug with my own hands. I didn't go back to the house right away. Stood in the barn while the light faded, the walls holding more than just the echoes of what had been said. The air felt different now, not heavier exactly, just changed, as if something had cracked beneath the surface, and it wasn't going to settle quiet again. The cradle sat in the far corner. I walked to it, slower than I meant to, and laid a hand on the edge. It was the same cradle I built the winter Mary was carrying, same one I swore I'd never move, never burn, never give away. I reached down and picked up the shawl folded neatly inside, Mary's favorite. She wore it to church that last spring. The fabric didn't hold her scent anymore. Still, I held it. The barn was quiet except for the wind brushing the doorframe. Somewhere out back, a goat bleated once, then went still. I climbed the loft ladder slow, one rung at a time. She was sitting in the corner near the far wall, her knees tucked in, eyes trained on the boards beneath her. Her face looked softer in the lamplight, worn from crying but not asking for pity. I stood a while before saying anything. "You should have trusted me with the truth," I said. "I was afraid if I did, you'd send me away." "I might have," I admitted, "but at least it would have been honest." She nodded. Nothing else. No explanations, no justifications. Just a quiet kind of regret. "I need time," I said. Her fingers curled slightly around the edge of her skirt. "I understand. I don't know what comes next, Etta, but I can't pretend tonight didn't happen. I'm not asking you to." The silence stretched, not as sharp as before, but not gentle either. I turned toward the ladder, paused, then looked back at her. "If that man returns," I said, "he won't leave standing." She didn't reply, but her eyes met mine. There was something in them now, not just sorrow, but recognition, like she knew what that promise cost me. Back outside, I circled the barn, walking nowhere in particular. And that's when I saw it, near the old trough, half buried in the dirt, a knife. Simple, dull, worn down at the hilt. Looked like it had been carried too long by someone who needed it close. I brushed the dirt from the blade and held it a moment. She hadn't drawn it, hadn't threatened me. Could have, but didn't, and that meant something. I just didn't know what yet. When I finally turned in for the night, I left the porch light burning. Didn't say why. Didn't need to. We didn't speak for 2 days. Not out of anger, not exactly. Just a space that opened up, and neither of us knew how to cross it. She stayed in the barn. I stayed in the house. We moved like ghosts of ourselves, shadows drifting through the same land, never touching. The chores got done. Feed set out. Fences checked. The goats settled down some, like they'd sensed the worst had passed, or maybe just grown used to the tension in the air. Once I caught a glimpse of her in the garden, bent low beside the carrots. Not weeding, just sitting. Sleeves rolled to the elbows, hands resting in the soil like she needed the weight of the earth to hold her still. I didn't say anything, didn't walk closer. Another time I left a slice of cornbread on the top step of the barn loft. When I returned at sundown, the plate was clean and set gently to the side. We didn't need words for that. The second morning, I found the locket. It wasn't hidden, just placed on the cradle's edge, chain curled, the clasp open. No note, no explanation. I didn't touch it, just stood there staring at it like it might say something if I waited long enough. That night, I walked past the barn on my way back from checking the fence line. The lantern was lit in the loft window. Through the crack in the boards, I heard her humming again. The same tune I had heard her hum when she first weeded the garden. The same one Mary used to sing when she rocked in the chair, hands resting on her belly before the fever came. It stopped me in my tracks. The sound of it not just familiar, but shared. Like two different pieces of my life had found the same rhythm, even if they didn't belong together. I stood in the yard until the light flickered out, didn't call up to her, Didn't climb the ladder. Just listened to the wind move through the cottonwoods and let the song linger in my ears. When I finally turned toward the house, I glanced at the cradle one last time. The locket was still there. But this time, it didn't feel like a secret. It felt like a decision. The rain came back the next evening. Not like the storm that first brought her here, gentler now, steady and slow, soaking the fields without fury. I was sitting by the fire, sharpening a blade I hadn't used in weeks when I heard the knock. Not loud. Just one tap on the door frame. She stood there on the porch, dressed damp from the walk across the yard, hair tucked behind her ears, hands folded beneath her belly. "I didn't mean to bother you," she said. "You didn't." She looked down at her boots, mud caked to the soles. "I couldn't sleep." I nodded toward the chair by the fire. "It's warmer in here." She stepped inside like it wasn't real, like the floor might vanish under her weight. I poured her a mug of coffee, black, bitter, but she took it like it was something sacred. We didn't talk for a while. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the rain brushing against the windows. Then, softly, she spoke. "I'm not the girl you thought I was." "I know. I lied about the past, about him, about what I took." I didn't interrupt. She stared into the fire. "But not everything was a lie. Not how I felt when you looked at me like I was worth saving. Not when I woke up and smelled coffee and heard goats calling. Not when I stood in front of that cradle and felt something I'd never felt before." I let the silence sit a little longer, then said, "You still have the locket?" She shook her head. "Left it in the cradle. I don't want to carry that weight anymore." I looked over toward the parlor. From this angle, I could just make out the edge of the cradle and the glint of silver resting on the quilt. She sipped the coffee, her hands steady now. "I won't stay where I'm not wanted," she said. "But I need to know, can I stay until the baby comes?" Her voice didn't tremble when she asked. That, more than anything, told me how far she'd come. I stood and walked to the cradle, picked up the locket, held it in my palm. Then I tucked it into the drawer beneath the quilt. When I turned back, she was still sitting there, still waiting. "You can stay," I said. She closed her eyes for a moment, not to cry, just to breathe. I brought down clean sheets, made up the spare room. She didn't say much after that, just ran her hand along the door frame like it was a doorway she'd never expected to pass through. That night I moved the cradle closer to the hearth, not because of the cold, because it finally felt like it belonged there again. In the morning, I found a piece of folded cloth on the cradle's edge, one of Mary's baby gowns, stitched with care and never used. Etta had pressed it flat, washed it, left it out without a word. She came in from the garden with dirt on her fingers and a quiet smile on her lips. Didn't need to ask if she could hold the gown. She just did, and I let her. I still don't know everything she ran from. Still don't know all the things she lost, but I know what she found here. And maybe this time, that's enough.